You got to stay on. They have quality depth at every position. They've got size. They've got elite skill set. And so for us, we got to be on, and we got to be attentive, and we got to be aware the entire possession defensively. It's going to take a lot out of us. This is not. We can't just go out and try to outscore Dallas. They can score too. So we've got to be really intentional defensively in our coverages and executing our coverages. But we got to take it one possession at a time. All right, bring us home.
Trust is the hardest currency to earn in professional sports, and once it's broken, everything starts collapsing fast. If fans thought the Indiana Fever losing their home opener to a struggling team was already the low point of the weekend, then they clearly hadn't seen the post-game press conference yet. Because the moment coach Stephanie White spoke into that microphone on national television, the internet exploded. Her comments spread across social media at lightning speed, with fans calling them one of the most baffling and concerning coaching explanations the WNBA has seen in years. But the situation became even more explosive moments later when Caitlin Clark sat in the exact same chair and, through her calm and measured answers, appeared to completely contradict the narrative being pushed by the organization. Suddenly, the comment sections turned into chaos. Fans were furious, accusing the franchise of hiding behind excuses while refusing to address the real problems happening in plain sight. Millions of Clark supporters started questioning everything: the coaching decisions, the rotations, the medical handling, and whether the front office was being fully honest about what was happening behind the scenes. And beneath all the anger sat an even darker fear growing louder by the minute, that the organization may already be trying to downplay an injury situation surrounding the biggest star the league has seen in years.
Horrifying.
Started off a little slow, I think, just the anxiety of the first game, trying to work through that. But overall, I felt good, felt fast out there. Felt like I was literally a couple buckets away from putting together a really, really good game and helping us win. But our offense is obviously not the issue. We're perfectly fine on offense, and there's still so many things we can do better on that end of the floor, but you gotta get.
The Indiana Fever walked out of an overtime shootout against the Dallas Wings after giving up 107 points on their own floor, but what happened after the game may have caused even more damage than the loss itself. Caitlin Clark, Kelsey Mitchell, and Aliyah Boston combined for 73 points, delivering exactly the kind of explosive offense this franchise was built around. Then coach Stephanie White stepped to the podium and stunned fans by saying, "We cannot just go out and try to outscore Dallas." The reaction online was immediate disbelief. Because to Fever fans, that statement sounded completely disconnected from the identity of the roster standing in front of her. You have Clark, one of the greatest offensive creators women's basketball has ever seen. You have Mitchell dropping 30 points like it's routine. You have Boston controlling the paint offensively. The entire foundation of this franchise, both competitively and financially, revolves around overwhelming opponents with offense. So when White publicly suggested the Fever couldn't win by simply outscoring a team that struggled heavily the previous season, many fans heard it as a complete surrender of the team's greatest strength. The comparison people started making felt brutal. It was like a Kansas City Chiefs coach claiming he didn't want to rely on Patrick Mahomes to throw the football. And then came the moment that turned frustration into full-blown controversy. Minutes later, Clark sat down in the same press room and calmly told reporters, "Our offense is obviously not the issue. We are perfectly fine on offense." In one sentence, fans felt she had directly contradicted her own coach without ever sounding confrontational. Suddenly, the divide between White's defensive concerns and Clark's confidence in the offense became impossible to ignore. To be fair, White's defensive philosophy wasn't entirely irrational on paper. The Wings, under coach Latricia Trammell, have dangerous scorers like Paige Buchers and strong offensive movement that demands defensive discipline. But all of that strategy crashed into one brutal reality. The Fever still surrendered 107 points at home. Fans didn't want to hear about defensive schemes when Dallas guards were slicing through the defense almost uncontested. And instead of taking full ownership of that collapse, many viewers believed Stephanie White's comments came across as deflecting blame away from the coaching failures that allowed the game to spiral out of control.
Again, on the floor, learning how teams are going to play differently against us with all of those three and the rest of our core back together on the floor. And so we got to be patient with that process. I know we want it instantaneously, and that's kind of the world we live in. Everybody wants everything right now. But I think we give each other grace and give ourselves grace through this process. But these guys are competitive.
Embarrassing.
And they
Then came the moment that really pushed the fan base over the edge. When coach Stephanie White was asked about the chemistry and timing of the roster, fans expected accountability after a brutal defensive collapse. Instead, she talked about patience, growth, and giving each other grace. And that single word, grace, instantly became gasoline on the fire spreading across the internet. Because to frustrated supporters of the Indiana Fever, this wasn't some rebuilding project learning how to compete. This was a franchise charging premium ticket prices while showcasing one of the most explosive offensive cores in the WNBA. Fans were spending serious money traveling across the country to watch Caitlin Clark, Kelsey Mitchell, and Aaliyah Boston compete. So hearing the coach ask for patience after allowing 107 points at home felt completely disconnected from the expectations surrounding the team. Online reactions turned brutal almost instantly. Comment sections filled with accusations that White was dodging responsibility instead of confronting the failures directly. Fans mocked the idea that a roster built around elite offensive talent should somehow be incapable of outscoring opponents, while others accused the organization of hiding behind generic coaching cliches instead of acknowledging the urgency of the moment. To many people watching, the Fever completely misread the mood of their own fan base. Supporters no longer wanted polished talking points about growth and trust building. They wanted answers, adjustments, and accountability. And the frustration only intensified when fans felt White's comments started shifting some of the blame back onto the players themselves, rather than fully owning the coaching mistakes that contributed to the collapse.
Have a player-led team going into the season, especially with championship aspirations.
It's really important. I mean, they're our big three. And, continuing to challenge them to take ownership of that. And that's not just on the floor. It's off the floor. It's in the locker room. It's when things aren't going your way. It's when things are going your way. It's holding each other accountable and the team accountable. It's lifting each other up and the team up.
The tension surrounding coach Stephanie White only intensified when reporters asked about leadership inside the Indiana Fever locker room. Instead of fully owning the collapse, White explained that she was continuing to challenge Caitlin Clark, Kelsey Mitchell, and Aaliyah Boston to take greater leadership responsibility both on and off the court, especially when things start going wrong. She even suggested Mitchell was still growing into that role. But for many fans, those comments landed terribly. Online, people immediately accused White of shifting responsibility away from herself after a disastrous defensive performance. Supporters believed that after losing a home opener in that fashion, the head coach should have stepped to the podium and taken full blame for the team's preparation and defensive breakdowns instead of talking about player leadership challenges. To them, every answer started sounding like another deflection. First toward officiating, then toward the growth process, and now toward the players themselves. That's why frustration around the organization keeps growing louder. Fans feel like accountability is disappearing at the exact moment the pressure surrounding the team is reaching its highest point. And while White continued explaining systems, culture, and leadership development, many supporters couldn't stop comparing her answers to the calm, direct honesty coming from Clark's side of the podium, creating an even deeper sense that something inside the franchise feels increasingly disconnected behind the scenes.
Shot the ball incredibly well. Really the only quarter we put together was the third. I guess in the fourth we were fouling, so but figured it out a little bit there in the third. We just got to be able to do that a little more consistently. But it was a great test. It was a great game. Our locker room was positive afterwards. So we're not going to hang our heads. We're going to move forward. A lot to be proud of and a lot to learn from too. So there's only one of 44. We got a long ways to go.
At the end of her press conference, Caitlin Clark said something that instantly sent shockwaves through the basketball world. She calmly explained that the Indiana Fever locker room was still positive after the loss and that the team planned to move forward with plenty to be proud of. But for a huge portion of the fan base, those words landed like a warning siren instead of reassurance. Because this wasn't a narrow loss against a championship powerhouse. The Fever had just surrendered 107 points at home, watched their stars combine for 73 points offensively, and still lost despite getting almost nothing from the bench. To many fans, a locker room staying positive after a defensive collapse like that felt deeply unsettling. In other major sports environments, supporters argued, a loss of that magnitude would create anger, urgency, and visible frustration inside the building. People online started questioning whether the team's competitive edge was beginning to disappear beneath all the messaging about patience, growth, and staying composed. Critics connected that atmosphere directly back to coach Stephanie White, whose repeated focus on grace and long-term development made some fans fear the organization was becoming too comfortable with losing games it should be winning. And while debates over leadership and mentality were already exploding across social media, an even bigger fear was starting to grow underneath it all: concern over whether the franchise was being fully transparent about Clark's physical condition and the seriousness of her back issues.
A question about the injury report when he downgraded to out. Can you give us an update there?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is we want her to be 100% when she's out there. We don't want her to be hesitant. We want to be, this is just overly cautious to make sure that we're not putting her in any position to regress.
So, is you saying this?
You made a couple of quick trips to the locker room. Was there a reason for that?
Sorry, oh, my bad. Just getting my back adjusted. It gets out of line pretty quickly, so just getting my back put back in place a little bit. But other than that, feel great. Bye.
When reporters asked Coach Stephanie White about the injury situation, her answer sounded polished, controlled, and carefully built to calm the storm. She explained that the Indiana Fever simply wanted Caitlin Clark at 100% and described the situation like routine caution. Nothing serious, nothing alarming, just standard management for a long season. But then Clark sat in the exact same chair and completely changed the emotional weight of the conversation with a few brutally honest words. When asked about her repeated trips to the locker room tunnel, she casually revealed that she was getting her back adjusted because it gets out of line pretty quickly. And suddenly the entire mood around the franchise shifted. Fans weren't hearing routine maintenance anymore. They were hearing a 24-year-old superstar, supposedly in the absolute prime of her career, calmly describing a back issue that already requires in-game realignment just to keep playing. That's the part that terrified people. Clark didn't sound dramatic or emotional. She sounded used to it. And that made the situation feel even heavier. Fans immediately started comparing it to aging legends like Larry Bird, players who dealt with serious back problems after years of brutal professional wear and tear, not at the very beginning of their careers. Online, supporters began connecting this moment to previous frustrations with how the organization handled injuries, arguing that trust had already been damaged long before this press conference even happened. Every vague update from the past suddenly came rushing back into the conversation, fueling fears that the franchise might once again be minimizing something far more serious behind closed doors. At the same time, frustration surrounding White continued growing after fans learned she reportedly received 0 votes in league surveys for best coach, while ticket prices for upcoming games started dropping dramatically despite all the hype surrounding the team. To angry supporters, the entire situation now feels like a franchise caught between massive expectations and growing instability. They see a generational superstar battling through physical pain, a defense giving up huge numbers nightly, and a coach publicly claiming the team cannot simply outscore opponents despite having one of the most explosive offensive trios in the league. That combination has created a feeling of panic spreading through the fan base, with many wondering whether the Fever are mishandling the most important moment in franchise history while the pressure around Clark continues getting heavier by the day.